That's what grief does. We try to keep it manageable and put all sorts of structure and expectations around it, but it does whatever it wants anyway. This book started as an idea I tiptoed around for months. It felt like an important project, but I had absolutely no idea how to begin it. I called it Everyday Grief from the start, and the title came from my feeling of being under an avalanche of loss, all kinds, and not really knowing how to deal with it every single day.
This is People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. People and Their Poems is presented by Oronog Mountain Publishing. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome to People and Their Poems podcast. I'm Sandy Carlson. I'm here today with Cindy Eastman. She is a teacher, a writer, an essayist who has a Substack called Silver Linings, and she has published extensively on aging and grief. And we're here today to talk about a recent collection that Cindy edited called Grief Like Yours. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you making time for me.
I am excited to talk about your collection, which seems like a strange thing to get excited about. You know, it's such a big topic. And I'm just curious, what was your inspiration to put together an anthology of writings about grief?
Well, I've experienced a lot of loss in my life, and I would say over the last 9 or 10 years, it was kind of morbid. I started keeping a list, like not just personal losses, but celebrities or community members, and I just thought there's just so much happening. But I lost my mother, and that precipitated us bringing my dad to come live with us, and so he came to live with us with the idea that my sister, who lived in Connecticut, would be available to help out. But she was dealing with cancer, a recurring cancer, and she died a year after he moved in. And then I lost a close friend, and then we had a pandemic, and then my dad died, and I thought, and actually I think I started this, well, no, then my dad died, and then so I thought, after caregiving, and I thought, okay, we can sort of take a minute and catch our breaths. But 6 months after my dad died, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer. So I think it was during that time I thought there's just so much grief, there's just so much loss. And I started thinking about it and writing about it. And I wrote a little bit with my daughter, while she was undergoing treatment. And I kind of became aware of anticipatory grief. And it just really, I thought there's too many ways people can experience loss. And so I decided that what if we hear from everybody? And so I put out a call for submissions, and I got over 70. I got 70 writers with, some, multiple submissions. It was a huge response.
What was the window for submission?
It was, I put it out in February of 23, and I closed the submissions in that June. So about almost 6 months.
Wow. So what was it like for you as the editor, as the curator of this collection, to deal with all of that in your own life and then receive those submissions? And also, did you receive them as prose, poetry? How did people submit?
So we put it out for both prose, essays and poetry. I said I would consider fiction, short stories, but that would be, on a case by case kind of determination. And what I did is I didn't read any of them at first. I decided I can't just, keep reading these stories. But once the submission date closed, I I started reading them. And I I didn't have an idea of how I was going to put it together or what it was going to look like. But as I started reading them, the stories sort of, they say this all the time with writers, it's like the stories write themselves, just sit back and listen and your story will come, tell you, reveal itself. And that's kind of what happened with this as well. The stories just started putting themselves in order and making sense of the relationship, and it was very, I really, I mean, it was, the topics, of course, were sad. And because of everything that I had been dealing with and was still going through, there were times when I was not able to, spend too much time on them. But I began feeling a real responsibility to protect and continue with this project. So it felt good to kind of really care for these stories and make sure that they ended up in the book, in book form. This was their intention. They sent them in because they wanted to publish them, and I felt that that was my responsibility to make that happen.
It's amazing. And what was was there a geographical range that the stories came from?
Well, I put it out to my limited network, but we have a story from Italy. I believe there are a couple from the UK. A man wrote in from Turkey, and then across the United States. So it's global. It's international.
That's neat. Are there any common threads running through them despite the diversity of formats and places that they came from?
I really did want to collect as a diverse uh, array of voices as I could. Of course, mostly women. They're mostly women writers. There are some men who wrote in, and I think there are some people of color, but not as many as I was hoping would contribute. I think the response is largely women. They are, and there's a whole section called husbands because a lot of women wrote about losing their husbands, which is wonderful that they were able to do that. And so and even though there are, I don't know, half a dozen or more essays on having lost a husband, they're also very different because everybody's grief is different, um, so I think it is a nice diverse selection of voices. And some are very poignant and some are very tragic and some are funny. And the poetry is different as well, as poets, also have very different voices and they express everything differently. So yeah, I was really pleased with the submissions that we got, the diversity of it.
Yeah. Would you read us a selection?
Well, I have I didn't write any of the poems. Um and I did write the introduction. I didn't put a piece in um of my own except for the introduction. So I thought maybe I'd read an excerpt from that. Is that
Oh, sure. That'd be great.
okay? So I wrote this as the introduction. I was considering putting a piece in, but I wanted to make sure that I had room for everybody. So this was just the title was changed once I submitted my manuscript. So this sort of explains why I came up with this idea for a book. Grief misplaces things. Dates, places, and people shuffle around and show up where they are least expected. I heard an interview with musician Regina Spektor talking about how she really wasn't aware how long it had been since her last album. She was too busy making it. It was only during the interviews that she was giving that she realized it had been a while. And the way she explained it was like this: I'm not really aware of time in a very useful way. I thought that was a perfect description of grief, not being aware of time as we once knew it. It came up for me as I was writing this piece about my reaction to a movie. For all the years, I imagined myself watching a movie on the sofa that we had in Lockhart, Texas, while I was pregnant with Annie. I could see in my mind's eye where the TV was, how the sofa was situated, and some vague idea of what I was wearing. For some reason, I checked online to see when the movie came out because I suddenly wasn't sure that we had HBO at the time. When I found out the movie, when I found the movie, I discovered no, it couldn't have been that time when I was watching it. The movie didn't come out until 6 years later. I had amended my memory for what I wrote here, but the fact that I believed for so long, over 40 years, that I had watched that movie in that very spot was stunning to me. That's what grief does. We try to keep it manageable and put all sorts of structure and expectations around it, but it does whatever it wants anyway. This book started as an idea I tiptoed around for months. It felt like an important project, but I had absolutely no idea how to begin it. I called it Everyday Grief from the start, and the title came from my feeling of being under an avalanche of loss, all kinds, and not really knowing how to deal with it every single day. The different kinds of loss started to reveal themselves as a separate but equal experience that require energy and attention and cannot all be lumped together as I'm sad. Grief demanded my attention, and I was exhausted. And then I realized that I was experiencing the kind of grief that doesn't go away. It is integrated into who I am and will impact my life from now on. I will live it every day.
That's powerful. I think the idea of grief demanding our attention it's a powerful force. It really is.
Because I've been doing so much writing about it, because I'm a teacher, because I facilitate a writing through grief group, I spend a lot of time thinking about it and how we understand it as people, as a society, as family members and community members. I just feel like we do put there are a lot of structures around it. Like you get 3 days bereavement at work. People start looking at their watches when you're still sort of walking around a year later sad, and they think kind of time to wrap this up, right? And I just the people I've talked to and the pieces I've read and just my own experience, grief is a very different thing than I think a lot of people understand. And so it's interesting to me to always kind of go a little bit deeper and understand it better, if it's even possible.
And I think culturally, our sense of time has been changed by electronics and the internet and the brevity of TikTok videos and Instagram slides, and it's a really intimate experience. I had my great uncles served during World War II in the military, and my great uncle Lawrence was too young to go but went, and he was a submariner, and the Japanese sank his submarine.
Oh.
And it was his last tour of duty. He was supposed to come home, and his older brother, I was very close to him. He was, and after he retired in the 1970s, he would go to these commemorative events for submariners around the country to see if anybody there knew anything about his brother and could tell him something. And I have copies of the letters. He made photocopies in the early days of the photocopier. This gave him great pleasure to make copies of things for people in the family, of these men, these veterans writing back and saying, I didn't know your brother, but trying to offer some kind of comfort. I'm sure he was an honorable and fought bravely and this kind of stuff, but they would give some glimpses into what it meant to be a submariner, to be in the service at that time and in that capacity. And they understood the loss, and couldn't fill the hole. And my uncle's legacy to his siblings and to me was this history lesson. And at a time when people really didn't talk about it, he just sort of got on with things. So I think it's an incredible phenomenon that people want to write about it, that they want to be an audience to the story of grief, and that we don't know. I think of like after the Civil War, the spiritualist movement and the seances and trying to connect with those
Mhm.
lost boys, because our culture disintegrated essentially in the loss of that and you used the word integrating our grief into who we are. That's work.
Yes, it is a lot of work. And like I said, it demands your attention. It is exhausting. It changes your life. But there's such a disconnect between what people expect of us
Mm-hmm.
and what we just instinctively feel like we need to do to honor whoever our lost loved one or ones are. It's, I think a lot of us tend to default to, well, they don't really understand. I can't really talk about it. I'll just do my job, show up every day, punch my time clock and do the thing that I'm expected to do, rather than really understand that just take a minute, just stop for a minute. And, if you need to just not do anything for an entire day, don't. If you need to cry a lot, cry a lot. There's just so many, like I said, so many kind of conventions about how we're supposed to grieve that it doesn't give us a lot of permission to do what we need to do for ourselves.
True. And I hear you. I remember going back to work after my mom passed, and my boss was very good to me at the time. And another teacher said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I had been out for 5 days. I was handled very generously, honestly, in our culture. That 3-day class, I had 5, and I thought, have I done something wrong?
Yeah, right.
Am I
Right.
not being a good daughter right now? It was very perplexing. So there's always a sense of who's judging, and you're
Yes.
trying to give people what they want, and it's like, okay, when I go home, I'll think about this. It's a very weird, like, which box do I put this in till I get to it?
This what?
Well, which box do I put my grief
Oh,
in?
right, 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 right.
Then
Or do I have to find another box? Is there one up in the closet?
could you just speak to the experience of dealing with so many writers? I'm just thinking of people who want to be a part of a collection. Maybe let's take it from that angle. If people who submit to anthologies, what should they expect? Like, what is the experience for the writer, do you think, of being a part of a collection of works by people they've don't necessarily know or have heard of?
Well, I think that, well, one thing that came up for me with this particular topic is that there were people that I had first time writers and established writers contribute, which was amazing. And some of the first time writers were very, is this okay? Can I write about this? Is it legitimate? Is it sad enough? I don't know. It's like they were concerned about whether it would be, an. Topic, you know. But some of the established writers said the same thing. It's like, well, it's about my dog. Is that okay to? And I said, my answer across the board was yes. Is it a loss? Are you grieving? Yes. And a couple of writers, especially again with a topic like this, I think that it probably what you want to write isn't going to just show up on the page the first time. There probably will be some back and forth. So somebody who maybe wants to contribute to an anthology might consider maybe just taking a class, looking for a writing class that they could hone their work in. If there's I mean, I hold a writing through grief work writing class. But when I think after I had put out the call for submissions, I also offered a couple of one-off writing through grief workshops for people who were considering it but didn't know where to start.
Right.
So probably there's a class or some writing group or something that, or just even creating your own little writing group with one or two people. You can just sort of go back and forth and, but I think the bottom line is just if you want to do it, keep at it. Just do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm listening to you and I'm just thinking about how you go deeper inside yourself when you write, and you're also building community and connection when you share individually. And, sometimes like if I'm at an open mic, I feel like there's the reward for the work right there.
Yeah.
It's that human connection and the kind of publication, that you're adding your voice to this larger conversation about what it means to be alive.
I got, before it was even a book, I got so many emails from people, thanking me for just providing, just like, hey, you want to write a book about grief? It's like, and they did, and they expressed themselves sometimes like for the first time ever. And it was just, and it wasn't me, obviously, it wasn't, but they were just so grateful to be able to finally have expressed it. And like you said, and then once you express something, once you process it a little bit, then it's a little different. You think about it differently, you feel it differently, and it just, I think, adds to the understanding of what like the individual is going through, especially with grief, so it was really, I think it was like, like a sigh of relief for having gotten this up and out and, on paper, and then it's going to be a book. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So I think that really made people feel good about themselves.
That's amazing. Were there any big surprises or discoveries you made while you were working on this project for these
Well,
past?
I think the fact that people still they couldn't legitimize their own grief. They weren't sure that it was an appropriate topic. I think that was the biggest surprise, that people had so much trouble understanding that, yes, of course, it's a valid piece. It's a valid feeling. And I think that was important to affirm. At one point, I think I said there were over 70 writers. And I did, and some had multiple submissions. And this goes into the what did you learn about doing an anthology bucket. But I finally ended up, I kept them all. There may have been one or two that just weren't quite to the topic. But so I limited it to one piece per writer, and I just included all of them because I just couldn't, after so many people wrote so many heartfelt things about their loss, I didn't really feel like it was, I just kept them. Eventually some people chose to withdraw or something, so it did whittle down, so there aren't that many in the book still, just different reasons people withdrew or decided against it or something. But at the beginning I was like, nope, everybody's in. That's it.
And that's what art does, right? There's a place for everybody. I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
And I know your book is available online through Barnes and Noble and Amazon.
Yep. And Bookshop.
And Bookshop.
And I think you can go in, I think it's been traditionally distributed, so you could go into your favorite independent bookstore and order it. So
all right. So
available.
That's great. So just one last question, Cindy. You're a dynamo. What's next on your agenda in the world of writing and publishing?
Well, I mentioned my daughter had cancer, and she did pass away from cancer last year. She was a writer. She was kind of a emerging voice, and she had started a memoir during her treatment, and she wanted to leave a lot behind. She has a 13-year-old son.
Oh.
So she began this memoir, and it wasn't finished, but I think I'm going to be able to take what she wrote and combine it, include some of the other things, some of her earlier writings that maybe weren't specific to this, but I'm going to put it together, and that's my next project. So I'll be working on that.
That sounds like a really wonderful way to be with her in spirit.
I really love working on, she was a great writer. She had a really strong voice, and she and I wrote several articles together for the Hearst papers, the Connecticut Post, I think, and the Hearst papers, about having, it was a mother-daughter conversation about having cancer. So I will include those. And yeah, she had a very strong voice and had a lot to say. So I'm gonna get it out there.
All right, well, I'll look forward to reading that too. Thank you for your time, Cindy, for being a part of People and Their Poems podcast. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you inviting me, Sandy. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
This has been People and Their Poems, presented by Oronog Mountain Publishing. Be sure to check the show notes for more information about this episode. Visit oronogmountainpublishing.com for more information about our services and writing opportunities. And visit peopleandtheirpoems.net to learn more about the podcast.